Support for Flying Valiant Builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs on YouTube, Video Geek Productions, the Brian Smith YouTube channel, Jonathan Vonesh, Wade Hendryx, Larry Presnell, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Good artists borrow, great artists steal outright. That's a phrase I just made up. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and we've got another 3 Blind Mice challenge. If you haven't seen any 3 Blind Mice videos before, the short answer is that Lee, George, and Paul, over at their various channels, check their links in the description below, offer up a challenge every so often for the rest of us to get together and build the same casting. And this month, the challenge was the Hot Wheels 32 Ford panel truck. Now, originally I was thinking of sitting this challenge out because I didn't have the casting, but then I remembered I did have the casting because my friend Super Wes, check out his channel in the description below, gave me some of his old Hot Wheels castings, including this one. So the challenge was back on. Then came the question of what to do with it. While I was struggling to figure that out, I was watching other builders and saw that Cole over at Kuda's Diecast Customs had done a weathering tutorial. And I commented that it was interesting to watch other weathering videos to see how other people achieve the same look, and that it's always nice to learn something new. He suggested that I might try some of his techniques on a future build, and then I knew what I was going to do. And with that in mind, let's get to the breakdown. As with all 3 Blind Mice challenges, there are only 2 rules. First is to use the casting, in this case the Hot Wheels 32 panel truck, and the second is have fun. For me, the personal challenges were to try Kuda's Diecast Customs weathering method, but then give it my own flair, and finally, to blow Cole's mind. Ready? Punch that subscribe button, let's boogie. This is a weird casting in that it comes in 3 pieces, which leaves it pretty ripe for customizing, so I'm eager to see how the other builders do theirs. The plastic part in the middle will be a challenge. Hot Wheels and Matchbox, and pretty much everybody else for that matter, their plastics tend to be pretty fibery, so the more you file on them, the more stringy and particly they get. So it's tricky to try and clean them up without ending up with a really coarse mess. So I ended up ultimately leaving it alone for the most part, despite the rough edges. The paint was a monster in and of itself. I had this thing in Aircraft Stripper for well over 2 hours, and it still stuck on. And I spent way too much time wire wheeling and picking off all of the different strings of paint that stuck in all of the nooks and crannies. I do like that this casting has a lot of deep crevices for detailing, but man, is it difficult to get in those little nooks and crannies, especially the louvers in the front. By the time I had finally gotten most of the paint off, it was time to take in how brutally awful the quality of this casting was. It had some serious seam lines along the back, and the back of the roof was a complete mess. So I filed them like crazy, ended up using the flap wheel from a Dremel tool, which I never thought I would use on a casting, but really had to wear things down to get them smooth on the back. I did use the Dremel a little bit on the plastic just to put a few dents in the fenders, but working by hand is the best way to go with plastic like this. I cut off the Nub Steering Wheel, which in this case wasn't even a nub, it was just a bulge on top of something that's supposed to resemble a dashboard, and added my own 3D printed wheel. And I was so proud of myself. I actually proactively checked the wheels and tires for fitment before launching into paint. And of course they didn't fit because I'm adding custom wheels, and nothing ever goes easy ever. But because I got to it early, I was able to cut the axle tubes and miss out on a brutal headache later. Something I thought was cool about a lot of the 32 panel trucks I looked up was the placement of side view mirrors in the middle of the A-pillar. So I wanted to recreate that with a punch, a 1mm drill, and a couple of bent axle wires. I also wanted to recreate the vinyl top that a lot of these panel trucks have, and I wanted it to be a little more than just a painted surface. So I used some tissue paper like you'd use to stuff a gift bag, and some matte Mod Podge. Normally I thin it with water, and this time around I thought I'd see what would happen if I just used the matte Mod Podge. So I dabbed some on the car, pressed the tissue paper in place, rolled out as many wrinkles as I could, but I left a few, both because it was hard to get out without tearing, and I thought it would look more realistic, and threw it in the food dehydrator. Like I suspected, the heat and dry air from the dehydrator stretched the matte Mod Podge and created a fairly tight textured surface with the tissue paper, and with it all dry, all that was needed was cutting the line around the roof and tearing off the excess paper. This also created a nice ragged edge edge to make it look like a weathered vinyl top, which is what I was ultimately going for. In hindsight, this would have probably been quicker to do with just paper masking tape, but this gives a finer texture than masking tape would have given, and I think it looks more scale correct. I did a quick check of everything before going to the paint booth and noticed that the bumpers had some pretty serious seam lines as well, so I filed them off and used the Dremel to notch a few dents in the otherwise straight bumpers. And it was off to the paint booth and time to start the Kuda's Diecast Customs method of weathering. But before that, I needed to get a few details done, like the Stewart Simple Mirror paint for the grille and Vallejo Heavy Khaki for the interior. By the way, I'm not going to give away Cole's full method for weathering. You're going to have to go watch that video for yourself. And be sure to subscribe while you're there and tell him I sent you. Cole's channel has just under 150 subscribers as I'm recording this, and I think we can double that. So let's all get together and jump over to his channel and subscribe and tell him I sent you. Go ahead, do it right now, I'll wait. Did you do it? Okay, great. Let's get back to the build. I realized as I was building this that Cole's take on weathering is to brush on the primer and then dry brush on the color, so I realized I was already off to a bad start because I had airbrushed on the primer. But I could still follow his basic method. I just needed a color, and my builder's block was continuing to strike on what to do with this build. So I went to my patrons and asked them to vote on what color to use. They chose yellow. But then it turns out Jim Silva is doing a yellow truck, and I just did a yellow taxi cab. So I went with the second place color, which was purple. Okay. Because colors fade on cars, and I find too often cars end up looking too dark in this scale, I decided to go light with the purple and mixed pink with a powder blue. Cole uses spray paints, but I chose to use craft paint because I do my work indoors and didn't want to fumigate my entire house with propellants and solvents, and I set to dry brushing. The trick with this method is to think where the paint shouldn't be and then paint around it. And it's a lot of not quite dry brushing, but damp brushing, where you go around pretty roughly with a soft brush and let the paint go where it would stick around. And that would mean like edges of panels where sun and heat wouldn't fade and dissolve the paint away over time, nooks and crannies where it would be protected from scrapes and dings, places like that. It was an interesting method and, quite frankly, faster in some ways than the way I do it. If I had to do this over again, I would have probably tack glued the body and the fenders together and done it at the same time. Another tool in Cole's arsenal are the Tamiya weathering powders, which I just happen to have. He used the A and C boxes, which include mud, gunmetal, silver, and rust. I decided to test his method out on the chassis before moving on to the body and highlighted a few details. I also used the Tamiya panel liner to draw out the details on the interior of the car. I did use Cole's brush on primer method for the wheels at least. Originally I was going to keep the strangely futuristic and very 80s taillight mount on the back of the panel truck, but then I realized the more I got into it, the more terrible that idea was. So I broke out the jeweler saw and chopped it off. This was the one time that the plastic really did come in handy because the jeweler saw cuts through it like butter. Then I used some corrugated styrene and some half round to fill in the empty space. While I had the styrene out, I realized what else was missing from this rat rod truck build, and that was liners for the running boards. So I used the corrugated styrene to make some. With the taillight piece gone, I needed to have some kind of taillight, so I drilled a 1mm hole in the driver's side fender and mounted another cut axle for an old-timey taillight. I also added a license plate mount. Fun fact, if you're trying to make a North America proportioned license plate in 1/64th scale, the dimensions are 2.5mm by 5mm. You're welcome. And while I was sitting there working on that, I realized I had forgotten a key part of Cole's weathering method, which is contrast. The light purple and the primer gray were too similar, so I needed to add something bold to make it look like less of a fuzzy mess. So I broke out some German black brown from Vallejo and a fine paintbrush and went to work on some chipping. Did you go over and subscribe to Kuda's Diecast Customs yet? Hurry up and do that while I'm doing this section. It takes a little while. Also, while you're checking things out, be sure to check out my brother's TeePublic and Redbubble stores. He's got some really cool diecast themed merch that I think you'll really like. And hey, maybe you could pick up a Flying Valiant build sticker too while you're over there. Just an idea. Okay, you're back. Great. I threw a coat of Satin Varnish over the entire car, which is basically like pressing the save key on a weathered paint job. It seals everything from water for the most part, and it's slick enough to allow decals to be applied without them binding up on the rough surface of a weathered build. It's handy to throw down a layer of satin varnish over most layers of weathering as a quick way to seal everything up so that the layer above doesn't activate the layer below. Unless you're trying to do that like the hairspray chipping method. While that was drying, I smoothly asked Cole to send over the logo for his channel and got to playing with it in Photoshop with some rusted metal texture and whipped up a couple decals. While most of the truck is purple, I did give it a blue door, and that was so I could put my logo on the other side. I'd like to think I would be the kind of guy who would give someone the door off my shop truck. But seriously, please don't ask for the door off my shop truck, it rains a lot here. Once the decals were applied, I brushed on a layer of ultra matte varnish, and to turn my attention to the grill, where I used Citadel's Nuln Oil in the recesses of the grill, and Wraith's Bone for a warm off-white color for the headlights. And then it was back to Cole's method, or Cole's Law, as I like to call it. Now it's more than just sliced cabbage. His method involves using the mud pastels first, all over the lower and dirtier parts of the car, followed by a generous application of the rust pastel. I might have used it a little heavier than he did. I think I was internally protesting over the shade of lilac that the car ended up turning out. This is my own step, but I then sealed everything with Pigment Binder, which is a really interesting no surface tension fluid that wicks over the top of a model very quickly and seals everything up. But it does tend to leave things sticky, which bothers me. So if you do use it, make sure you have something else to go on top of it, or your build might end up a little sticky and attract dust. Once the Wraith's Bone was dry, I went over it with some Wet Effects fluid from AK Interactive to give it a glass-like sheen. I dropped some metallic red on the rear tail light and did the same with the Wet Effects once it dried. One more application of ultra matte varnish, and because I didn't think it was rusty enough, I broke out some acrylic Vallejo rust wash. I was originally going to apply it strategically and then ended up going over almost the entire car, except for the blue door, so it would have a different finish to it. I then dabbed off a decent amount of it in spots with a cotton swab so that there would be some variation in the tone. And then I realized I had gotten this far without doing any panel liner on the actual vehicle, so out came the Tamiya again. Again, I cannot stress enough how amazing this stuff is to work with. I started with panel markers and thought they were amazing, and no, this is where it's at. It's not the cheapest method, but trust me, this is worth the money, and it is so easy to use. Once I was sure I was done with all the rust and dust, I touched up the chrome. Time to snap everything together, and wait a second. One last thing. There we go. Now it's done. Time for the decal and the build number, which was coincidentally 32. So one last time, here's what we started with. A 80s-tastic hot rod, courtesy of Super Wes. And I'm serious, go check out his channel. If you like music and movies, and I'm assuming you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a heart, I think you'll like his channel. Check it out. Thanks again, Wes. And let's see where it ended up. A crusty, ratty shop truck with the Kuda's Diecast custom treatment and a little flying Valiant flare. I want to thank the Three Blind Mice for hosting this event, and Cole over at Kuda's Diecast Customs for challenging me to get out of my comfort zone and try something new. Again, please check out everybody's links in the description below, and while you're there, check out my various patrons. You saw the Bandit level patrons at the beginning of this show, but I'd also like to thank my Rockford level patrons, the Mid-Island Customs Diecast channel, my amazing and talented and beautiful wife Carolyn, the Maple Leaf Matchbox Makeovers YouTube channel, Double B's Customs YouTube channel, the Diecast Pirate YouTube channel, Clarence, who I found out is Mr. Zanzibar91 on Instagram, thank you Clarence, and Gary Tasker. I'd also like to thank my Douglas level patrons, the Good Bad Better podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, the Curtis Crafts YouTube channel, the Jim Silva YouTube channel, and the Devil's Details Diecast YouTube channel. Again, they're all amazing, and thank you so much. It's incredibly flattering to have you all here. If you want to get in on the Flying Valiant fun and become a supporter, you can visit flyingvaliant.com or click on the Patreon link below. I'm doing my best to post something there every day for my patrons, and it would be lovely to have you along for the ride. Almost all of my builds are for sale unless otherwise stated, although this one isn't one of them. For some reason, this one disappeared. I have no idea where it went. Hopefully it turns up. If you want to buy a build, commission a custom, order some 3D printed parts, or some white toner printed decals, shoot me an email at flyingvaliant@gmail.com. I'm not the fastest builder out there, but I think you'll be pretty happy with the results. As always, please feel free to get social with me in the comments below or on Facebook or Instagram. Turn the red subscriber button gray and punch the bell icon so you don't miss out on my next build. It's gonna be a good one. As always, I want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So, until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.